Wake up! It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 162, Sleep in the Gilded Age. If you know your history. Welcome everyone to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter, neurologist, sleep specialist, and your host for this episode of the podcast. If you're new to the Sleep Unplugged podcast family, welcome. If you're a veteran, welcome back. We're glad you're here. You can always reach the Sleep Unplugged podcast through social media. Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Blue Sky Threads. It's all Dr. Chris Winter. If you have an idea for a show or question, comment, criticism about a previous show, please let us know. And a lot of you had really fun things to say about last week's episode about sleep in television. And in some ways, it kind of inspired today's episode, which we will get into. Like every episode, we have a lyric from a song that we will put on the Spotify music playlist that we compile for each season of the podcast. We are now on volume 4. So if you check out the Spotify Sleep Unplugged podcast volumes 1, 2, and 3, and now 4, you'll see songs that we've amassed and collected throughout the podcast. And this one's no exception. The song If You Know Your History is from the Bob Marley song Buffalo Soldier. Bob Marley, of course, the reggae pioneer, died at like age 36 of cancer, was widely regarded as an incredibly influential person in music. And, I knew this song. I think everybody who listens to Bob Marley and has the greatest hits or attended a college is probably familiar with this song. I didn't really know what it was about. I always assumed it had something to do with soldiers during like the Civil War and they were going out and, expanding the United States and killing buffalo. I thought that that's kind of what it was about. I never really looked into the history of the song, which is really fascinating. Now, this song came out in his final album, Confrontation, his 13th album. It was released in 83, but the song was recorded in 78. It just never made it onto one of the albums when he was alive. It was actually the only single, I think, off of Confrontation. It's one of his most famous songs. Like I said, even though it wasn't released when he was alive, the Buffalo Soldiers it was a black cavalry regiment. And I think certain regiments still continue today, um, and are recognized. These were made up of black soldiers that were fighting Native Americans during the Native American Wars after 1886. And the Buffalo Soldiers were these cavalry soldiers, and this was a nickname given to them based upon their fighting and their tenacity by the Native Americans. And yeah, so I think they started out as the Ninth and 10th Cavalry Regiment, but also there were infantry divisions. There's still some persist today. In fact, I think it's the 10th Cavalry that has the buffalo as part of its insignia. And I think there's a field at West Point called Buffalo Soldier Field. So they have been, widely recognized after the fact. It's a great song, and Bob Marley was using the plight of the Buffalo Soldier, this black infantry soldier, to sort of symbolize the plight of the um, black man in Jamaica, and he saw certain similarities. There was some criticism about it, saying, "Look, these were people going out west and oppressing Native Americans," but he really saw their role as very different. So we'll put Buffalo Soldier on the Spotify music playlist. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this podcast, if you're a listener of the podcast, you know this is the final episode of July. Did we not just have Christmas? So you can write in, please DM me because I'm pretty sure we had Christmas like 8 weeks ago. We are already through July. It's incredible. So the last podcast of every month, we do the top 10 threats to your sleep, and we're going to reorder them. So I've scoured the internet for information looking at um, threats to our sleep. Like, what is the research that's come out in the last month, and how does it affect our top 10 rankings? So I'm going to go through them very quickly. Our new top 10 threats to our sleep. Number one, screen time, up 3 points. Screen time, evening light exposure. Um, there was some interesting new research about that came out. There's a recent July 2025 study in Sleep Health found that individuals using screens for more than 2 hours after 8 p.m. had a 45% greater odds of sleep onset insomnia versus those individuals that didn't. Again, Sleep Health article July 25. That article was entitled Digital Evening Exposure and Adolescent Sleep Disruption. So because of that study, it jumps up to the number one spot. Number two, up 4 spots, psychological hyperarousal before bed, stress, rumination, doom scrolling. Again, July 2025 meta-analysis in Journal of Affective Disorders linked trait anxiety with increased nocturnal wakefulness and reduction of REM sleep duration. The name of that article, Sleep Impairment and Trait Anxiety, a meta-analytic review. Number three, up 2 spots, social jet lag, and I'm combining that with inconsistent sleep schedule. So social jet lag is essentially you have a work week schedule and you have a weekend schedule when it comes to your sleep. Um, and there were new findings from July 25 in Chronobiology International study tied greater than 90 minutes of social jet lag, which is not a lot, to an elevated inflammatory markers and poor sleep efficiency. That article, Inflammatory Correlates of Social Jet Lag in Working Adults. Number four, holding steady at number four is sleeping hot, and we're going to add climate to that. Um, July 2025 study, Heat and Human Sleep Loss, a global analysis, showed that for every 1 degree Celsius increase in nighttime temperature above average, reduced total sleep time by 12 minutes. Fascinating. That seems like it deserves its own podcast. We talk about that a lot. Like I was just listening to a great daily podcast. No, no, take it back. It was the Ezra Klein show, talking about are we sunk from a climate perspective? When you look at what's in the big beautiful bill, they're really rolling back a lot of the credits that were aimed to make us, smarter in terms of solar and wind. I think those things are now taxed to to start your solar farm if that's what you're planning to do it next month. You can be taxed for it. Apparently, in the future, they're going to let those incentives stay for a period of time, but then you'll start being taxed for it. But anyway, so it's interesting. So we talk about for every half degree, for every 1 degree, we see negatives. For every half degree, 1 degree, we dial back the temperature, we see positives. And here is a negative, that for every 1 degree we go up, we're going to lose 12 minutes of sleep. That's exciting. Number five, down 4 spots to the number five spot, is shift work, inconsistent sleep schedule. A new study in Lancet Neurology from June of 2025 showed permanent night shift nurses had 23% shorter total sleep time and elevated cortisol even during their rest days. You can check that article out, Sleep Debt and Circadian Stress in Shift Work Nurses. Number six, up 4 spots, is noise pollution, bedroom noise slash sound disturbance. This was a recent Berlin-based field study out of Environmental Sleep Medicine, July of 2025, showed traffic noise more than 45 decibels increased stage one, which is light sleep, and decreased N3 sleep, that is deep sleep. So we want to keep it quiet, you guys. Number seven, which is new to the top 10 threats to your sleep, poor mental health treatment adherence. This was a July 2025 study in Transitional Psychiatry, reported that 71% of PTSD patients with medication non-adherence met criteria for chronic insomnia. That does not surprise me at all. Number eight, down 1 spot, substance abuse, alcohol use, cannabis. This was a randomized trial in Sleep Medicine Reviews from July 2025, showed daily cannabis users had delayed REM onset, and reduced REM percentages by 21%. We did an article about cannabis, THC, cannabinoids. The bottom line there, probably no help and most likely harm. This is adding to that harm category. So if you're somebody who's using your cannabis, marijuana, THC gummies for sleep improvement, for sleep quality, stop fooling yourself. You're sedating yourself. This is not improving your sleep. It may knock you out faster. It may relax you and help you with anxiety. It is not improving sleep quality. Number nine, new to the list. The last two are new. Late day, high intensity exercise. I thought that was on our first list, but I looked back, it wasn't. July 2025 study in physiology behavior showed that participants who completed high intensity, that hit high impact intensity training within 2 hours of bedtime had longer sleep onset latencies and higher nocturnal core body temperature. Remember, we want our body temperatures dropping rapidly before we go to sleep, not going up. This is why we need to cool our bodies down if we're exercising at night. And number 10, new to the top 10 threats to your sleep, overuse of sleep tech. This is orthosomnia, Kelly Barron. We've talked about this before. Anxiety about sleep metrics. There was a study from the JMIR Mental Health from July 2025 showed that 26% of users of sleep tracking devices reported increased anxiety and intentional sleep restriction. This article was called Wearable Sleep Tech and the Rise of Orthosomnia. So, out of our top 10, sleep deprivation, although I think it may come back, caffeine and sleeping pills. So, that is your top 10 threats to your sleep for July. And I've got an interesting idea about what to do with the top 10 threats to your sleep in upcoming episodes. Stay tuned. I will let you know all about that. Here we go. So, sleep in the Gilded Age. One of the things that captivates me about sleep is the idea of historical sleep. And I think it's important to understand that sleep and science in general is always evolving. When we look backwards and see the picture of the surgeon smoking in the operating room, we think, oh, who would do that? Who is smoking in an operating room? Don't you know that environment has to be sterile? We wear gloves, we wear a mask, we gown up. Yes, infectious disease is real, and using a mask and gloves stops the spread of them. Don't be an idiot. So, of course, we do these things, right? We would never think of not washing our hands and gowning up before an operation now, even though that's what they did in the past. So, I love the idea of looking backwards as a lens for seeing things in the current. And that is one of the things that's very disappointing, I would say, about maybe the current way we think about science or look at science is science is rigorous. Science has rules. Science has a rich history of trial and error. And I think that we lose some of that when we try to make science consensus. Like if enough people believe something, then it is true. So I like the idea of this episode in terms of looking back as a way to measure progress. We are making progress. It doesn't mean we don't make mistakes or misinterpret things, but I believe in science and I believe in the progress that we make. And so I think it's going to be fun to sort of look back at this. Plus, I'm a huge fan of the Julian Fellows show on Max, The Gilded Age. I think it's a really, really fun show. And every episode leaves me wanting to look things up. I mean, it's kind of like the Netflix show Narcos. Like, I watch an episode. Did that really happen? Is that what really was going on? And so you're looking up and you're learning about, the Colombian drug wars and Carlos Escobar and the Tom Cruise character for, what was the All American or uh, anyway, the one where he was the CIA agent flying the airplane. I can't remember. It was something American, but anyway, it's that kind of thing. I like watching The Gilded Age. I think it's just really, really well done. So the purpose of this episode, or the thrust of this episode, is to kind of research when you're watching The Gilded Age and they're trying to get the trains built across the country. And I'm really interested in the plot line of the clock, the alarm clock that the little footman developed. We have alarms now. We talk about alarm clocks on this show. One of the very first episodes of the podcast was about alarm clocks. We can trace that back to the Gilded Age. I wanted to think about what was going on, even though it's not really talked about in the show directly. If Julian Fellows called me up and said, Chris, huge fan of your podcast, I'd really like to work in a storyline about sleep. My wife works at the Ringling Art Museum, and there's this really cool exhibit that just left there about mysticism and uh, like the like the seances and the people who could read minds, and I'm blanking on the name of the exhibit, but there was an episode about that in the Gilded Age where this woman is visiting a psychic, to do this seance to talk to her dead husband. So it's kind of fun to think about, well, hey, Chris, we did this thing about mysticism, this little small storyline. We want to do something about a character who may be struggling with their sleep and what they would find out if they went to the doctor in New York City and or something like that. So that's kind of where this sort of came from. So the first thing that we kind of think about with sleep in that time period as it differs from where we are now is that sleep was thought to be a passive state, that our minds were turned off when we sleep. And it's so interesting to me that in 2025, I believe that construction of sleep is still widely present in the public's eye. I mean, how many times have I been asked or seen in some sort of popular media, the inability to turn your mind off? I mean, I just saw it in a ridiculous ad for, bedtime stories on social media. Can't turn your mind off? Well, listen to our amazing bedtime stories read to you by this actor or whatever. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but what do you mean when you say you can't turn your mind off? Now, I know we use it sort of colloquially, like, well, I don't mean I can't literally reach into my mind and turn it off, but I can't get my mind to shut down. I can't get it into that turned off or passive state. That passive state doesn't really exist. Our brains are fantastically active when we sleep. So we are essentially chasing something that doesn't exist. It's a myth, right? It's well, the sun goes across the sky because it's being carried by Apollo's chariot or whatever. I can't remember who the god who was supposed to carry the sun across the sky in his like chariot with his winged horse or whatever. That's not real. The other thing that they thought of with sleep was that it was a nerve force, that the nerves within your body kind of linked the restoration of sleep with the restoration of this nerve energy. In fact, there was a condition at the time called neurasthenia, which was a vague diagnosis involving fatigue, insomnia, and nervousness. It was a very cultural phenomenon to be diagnosed with neurasthenia, particularly if you were in the upper class. The people that you would see in the Gilded Age, that's those are the people who would be diagnosed with it. And there are doctors on the Gilded Age from time to time. So you can imagine one, there's a character now, I don't want to ruin it for anybody, who has discovered some information about this person that she's in love with, and it's very devastating to her. You can very well see how she could be, bedridden and, call the doctor. I believe this character has neurasthenia. So that would be a really interesting plot line to kind of continue. So what would they do for the character with the neurasthenia? Hydrotherapy was very big at this time. And there still are, baths in New York City. I was doing some work for a supplement company, Natrol, and we were at the ancient baths of New York. Air, I think, was the name of the company, and we filmed there, and it was all seemed very old and therapeutic. So they really believed in that kind of hydrotherapy. And if you watch, there was a great movie, so, like it was about like a guy, gosh, I wish I could remember it, who was sort of committed to a wellness clinic. It had an amazing look. I don't think it was like the problem with being well or something like that. That was kind of the title. I'll try to find something about it. But it just had a great look, but it was all taking place at the wellness hospital, and they were, you know, making him eat certain things and baths and massages and things like that, all curated to help him uh, get over his mental anguish or whatever was going on in the film. Opium and morphine were commonly used. Sometimes movies, tend to kind of play on those sort of themes. They were prescribed because they weren't really regulated. They didn't really know a lot about them in terms of the downside effects. There really wasn't a stigma that went along with them at the time. Chloral hydrate was an early sedative that was sometimes used as well too. Rest cures were very popular in the upper class, where individuals who may have insomnia or hysteria were told to rest more often, and this was promoted by a neurologist named Silas Weir Mitchell, who was very prominent at the time. Electricity and magnetism was starting to be looked at as a potential treatment for various maladies. And then isolation, preferably in places that were well ventilated. Ventilation was really big. When I wrote my book, The Rested Child, I sort of set the current state of sleep in children against the perspective of an individual in the early 1900s. So this individual, Anastas Richardson, I wrote a lot about in that book, was a writer at the time, 1920s. She's on the tail end of the Gilded Age here, and she had very strong opinions about children and sleep. And so my interest in that history of sleep is kind of all over the place. And so if you read The Rested Child, it's not just about how do kids sleep from the time they're born till the time they have to college, but what did history think about these things, and why are sometimes those historical perspectives important to understand as we try to think about things currently? There was cultural attitudes around sleep. Sleep was very curated. If you watch these shows, it's very clear that these large homes had very large sleeping quarters with fireplaces, beautiful art, amazing beds, separate beds for husbands and wives. This was the place they would retire to after the women, after dinner, the men would go have their port in the billiards room, and the women would talk, and then they would all kind of separately retreat to their bed quarters. And that was a very important thing for their sleep. There was also emerging anxiety about sleep hygiene. So it was very important for them, luxury bedding, the best sheets, nocturnal routines were extremely important. And I love the idea when you watch these shows that the lights are very dim. There isn't a lot of electricity at this time, although it's coming, of course. So as the fire's going out, as the candles are put out, the light from the windows in the bedroom, the curtains are drawn, everything is sort of set on a regimented schedule, with not only food and activity, but also lighting to get people kind of ready for sleep. There was some scientific management that saw that some people thought sleep was necessary, that you had to have this 8 hour period in order to increase productivity. So some of those people were thinking about that at the upper class. At the working class, sleep was hard won. It was very irregular. Often a lot of, if you've ever been to the tenement museum in New York, I mean, it's just shocking the conditions people lived in, sleeping on floors, multiple people squeezed into these tiny rooms. So sleep had a very different meaning for these individuals. if you got it, you got it. If you didn't, you had to go to work and do what you need to do. There were a lot of, sort of religious and sort of beliefs about sleep and remedies that sort of circulated more in the working class, teas and superstitions and things. Roger Eckert's book, At Day's Close, A Journey in Nights Past, really talks a lot about sleep in the lower class and a lot of the rituals and beliefs and superstitions and religious imagery that came about when they talked about sleep. The technology at this time was very crude, but it's coming. Beds are now becoming much more luxuriously made. Feather beds and horsehair mattresses are still present, but there is an emerging mass-produced inner spring mattress that begins appearing near the end of the Gilded Age. It was patented, I believe, in 1865, but it would be, many, many years later till it was widely commercialized. Sheets and covers were being made of finer materials, particularly in the upper class. Mosquito netting, particularly, was being developed in places where that was a problem. Gaslight and kerosene lighting, electrical lighting was emerging by the late 1880s. And of course, this is really Rogers' premise of his book that when lighting became widespread, it changed the face of sleep forever. Urban noise, as you watch these shows, you can really understand these as these bigger cities are being built up. Noise pollution was extremely problematic. There were no rules about it. Streetcars, factories, all of these things, the gas lamps are all creating all kinds of noise throughout the night, which could be very disturbing to people's sleep, particularly when you had to ventilate your house by doing what? Opening a window. So you open the window in this in the city, it's extremely loud and extremely problematic for your sleep. The beliefs and superstitions we were talking about before, sleepwalking, nightmares, all these things had a sort of rich history in terms of these things being signs of other maladies, spiritual possessions, psychiatric imbalances. Dream interpretation was beginning. Freud hadn't yet published the interpretation of dreams that would happen in the 1900s, but the interest in dreams was certainly building. Night air was feared, particularly among immigrants and lower income tenements. So windows were sometimes sealed shut. So you can imagine the problems that caused in terms of disease spread, fire, etc. There was also a moral judgment around sleeping. Too much was slothful, too little was virtuous. There was art. Anya Demir would often, draw these little caricatures of people, the sloth and the kind of imagining this picture of this, person sleeping and, he's heavy and lazy. And so there was a very religious kind of tone that went along with sleep at that time. So the shifts in beliefs were starting to happen as industrial capitalization, I'm sorry, capitalism, began. More and more people had to wake up with clocks. They're being expected, to arrive at places at certain times. The 8-hour movement was gaining its momentum in the 1880s. And again, we still see that historically. 7 hours is probably the amount of time that's tied best to sleep health, yet we still hang on to the vestiges of that 8-hour belief that dates back to this time. And I think the biggest thing that, mental health reformers are really starting to look at, questioning whether these rest cures were helpful, and trying to promote more humane ways of viewing sleep. So, the Gilded Age really straddled two different worlds. It was the pre-industrial reverence for rest and sleep and dreams, and then this modern push for productivity and categorization and pharmacological management. This was really sitting at the edge of that time, which is extremely interesting and exciting. So that's it. I just wanted to kind of go through some ideas about the Gilded Age and how far we've come to think about sleep where we are right now. If you have ideas, questions, historical tidbits of knowledge you want to share, or anything I got wrong in this podcast, find me DM Chris Winter. Twitter, DM Chris Winter, Instagram, Blue Sky Threads. Check out our Spotify music playlist and Buffalo Soldier, which we will put on there. I've written two books, The Rested Child and The Sleep Solution, Why Your Sleep's Broken and How to Fix It. That's it. I want to say hello and special thanks to all the amazing doctors and fellows up at Walter Reed Hospital where I visited this week. You guys are great and appreciate your hospitality. And that's it. Until next week, sleep well.